Hi, welcome. Okay, so I'm just sorting all this out right now. I decided kind of at the last minute to go live on Instagram at the same time. So I've got my phone here and I've got my YouTube set up here. But thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate you coming in to hold space for me while I share this information, and also for holding space for yourself to take some time to reflect inward and do a little bit of self-reflection. It's not always easy to make time for that. I understand. It's something that definitely requires a little bit of practice sometimes. So this is the first of 4 Soul Selves sessions, as I'm calling them, to introduce you to the Soul Selves framework that I've created over the past 6 years or so. The Soul Selves originally emerged from my own awakening journey. There was these kind of repetitive things that kept happening and keywords that kept popping up and sort of pulling my attention towards them. And as I identified what they were, I started noticing them in other people's awakening journeys. And so as I started to dig into this a little deeper and do some more research into what that looked like and what it meant and what the significance was, these markers or phases or stages, as you want to call them, emerged and kind of deepened for me. So the soul selves themselves are essentially 5 markers, I call them, between the ego and the soul. So to begin, I invite you to think and reflect a little bit about your own spiritual journey, where you might be on your spiritual journey at the moment. If you feel like you have a spiritual journey at the moment, maybe it's something that you felt connected to much more when you were younger, and you feel like maybe it has dropped away and you're looking to recover it again. Maybe your soul has emerged in some way when you least expected it, when you were dancing or listening to music, or you had sort of this deep encounter that left you wanting more of that and wondering what that was. So I'd like to do an exercise or a little, I'd like to play a little bit first before we get into the depths of things here. And I think this is probably a game you're all familiar with. It's called Simon Says. And when I say Simon Says, bring your awareness to part of your body, I want you to bring your awareness and your attention and focus on that part of yourself. And if I don't say Simon Says, then don't bring your awareness to that part of yourself. You know the game. So let's start with Simon Says, bring your awareness to your toes. Now you may have to wiggle your toes a little bit. Maybe they'll crack like mine just did, to bring that sort of sensation into your body. You may have to close your eyes. You may notice that they feel warm or cold. Maybe you're wearing socks, or maybe you're barefoot. Now, bring your awareness to your left knee. I think I started this all wrong because I didn't say Simon Says for either of those. Okay, I'm going to start with Simon Says here. Sorry. I just was thinking totally off the side. But if you're here, please say hi in the comments and chat, because I want this to be interactive if you're listening, and I'll do my best to respond to the questions if you have any questions that come up. But yeah, if you're listening live right now, or if you're going to be listening to the replay after, yeah, please just jump in the comments and in the chat and let me know that you're here. But okay, back to the game. I'll do it right this time. Okay, Simon says, bring your awareness to your toes. And like I said, you can close your eyes, wiggle your toes if you need to. Just, Simon says, bring your awareness to your toes. Simon says, bring your awareness to your left knee. So now, again, you may need to straighten your leg or bend your knee. You may notice sort of a tingling sensation that goes into that knee as you bring all your awareness there. Maybe you even feel your pulse there as you bring your attention to your knee. Simon says, bring your awareness to your right hand. And again, you may need to wiggle your fingers, open and close your hand. You may feel that tingling sensation again that arrives there. Maybe your fingers are cold. Maybe your hands are sweaty or clammy. Simon says, bring your awareness to your third eye, the space between your eyebrows here. Again, you may want to close your eyes and turn your eyes up towards that space. There may be a very distinct sensation that is there as you bring your awareness there. It may be uncomfortable, or it may feel expansive. Now, bring your awareness to your breath. That time I didn't say Simon says, but that's okay, because I hope that all of you, in bringing your awareness to your breath, took a deep breath. Because our awareness doesn't always follow the perceived guidelines that we give it. And let's just continue that and take a few more deep breaths just to get centered into our seats and a little bit more relaxed. I have a lot of information that I'm going to share with you tonight and over the next few months. I am trying to break it up into some sort of reasonably sized pieces that are sort of digestible and somewhat entertaining for you to be able to hopefully take some of this information and maybe practice some of it over the next month and see how it responds and what you resonate with. I'd like to share with you an analogy to help us sort of introduce what the soul selves are. And as many of you know me from way back, I have a background in science. So of course I studied physics, specifically astrophysics. And one of the experiments that I did during my time in university was this spectrum analysis. It was one of the favorite things that I learned while I was there. And to put it simply, and I think probably many of you already know what this is, when you have sunlight or white light and you shine it through a prism, what emerges on the other side is the whole spectrum of visible light, which we call a rainbow. We give it name of the rainbow. And so similarly, if we were to take the light of our souls and shine it through the prism of our body, metaphorically speaking, what would emerge would be, again, this spectrum of energy that I call the soul selves. And just like the rainbow is just the visible spectrum of light that we can see, and we've given it names for each color, like red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, indigo, and so forth. The soul selves, again, I've kind of delineated these energies or wavelengths, as you would say, metaphorically, and given them names as well. So there's the bodily self, the vital self, the thinking self, the observer self, and lastly, the transcendent self. But just like the visible spectrum, there's actually light that and like wavelength and energy that far exceeds what we're able to see with the visible spectrum. And it's the same with the soul selves. There's actually stages that go beyond the transcendent self that we don't hear a lot about and we don't talk about a lot. And I am still personally learning about what those are and what that looks like. So right now we're just going to focus on those 5 main soul selves. As I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, like there is these words and thoughts and behaviors and actions that I've identified through my own experience, and then from researching through other people's awakening stories and spiritual texts and psychology and other modern spiritual teachings. There's these similarities that arrive in each one of these soul selves or each one of these groups. And it's those uniquenesses, those sort of identifiers, if you want to call them, that help us, once we understand what they are, they help us to be able to know where we are on our spiritual journey. So another way of looking at this is that I say we're illuminating the path between the ego and the soul. So if we're driving at night down the road and we've got our headlights on, when we turn the high beams on, we can see that much farther down the road. So the soul selves help us to illuminate what could be next on our spiritual path or our spiritual journey. And I want to take a moment here to just be really clear that there is no destination on the spiritual journey. That's one thing I think that we often get confused about. And I think early on, we think that there's something that we're trying to attain. We're trying to attain enlightenment or some other terminology that we hear out there. And I want to be really clear that that's not the case. That just as when we're shining that soul light through the prism, all of the light and energy that emerges on the other side is all still a part of that original divine light. It just looks a little different depending on what perspective we're taking at any given time. And so wherever we are on our journey is divine. It's exactly where we're supposed to be. And we're going to move up and down and throughout all these different soul selves at various times in our lives. And that's all part of this experience that we're designed to be having in this human form. So again, going back to these identifiers, once we understand the significance of certain words and common sort of terminology that's been used in any given soul self, we can then use that. Essentially, we can sort of like use our mind to help us get to a place that is essentially beyond our mind, which is what I would call consciousness. And going back to the science a little bit, there's actually a part of our brain called the reticular activating system. And I believe it's at the base of our brainstem. And it acts like a filter to help us sort of narrow down the amount of information that's coming at us at any given time, so that we can process what it is that we are perceiving in our reality, so to speak. This filter kind of acts like a bouncer, say, would at the bar. And it's got a list of all the things that, or all the people, or all the items that are allowed to come through the door into the bar. And if your name's not on that list, you're not going to be allowed to go in, essentially, right? And so right now, the list that we have, if we're not aware that it exists in our actual physical body, all the things on that list that are allowed into our perception and into our mind through all of our senses are things that we've put on there unknowingly or unconsciously, or we've been programmed or conditioned to put on by our society and our culture and our upbringing and all of the things that make us the person that we are in this moment. But one of the most amazing things about the RAS, or reticular activating system, RAS for short, is that once we know that this exists, we can then be empowered to change what is on that list at any given time, and therefore we can start to change and create our reality. Now, this is, bear with me while I get my train of thought here. So tonight, specifically in relation to soul selves, I want to share with you what I call an indicator. And the indicator that we're looking at or working with tonight is that of awareness, which is like the exercise that we did at the beginning, or the game Simon Says. And just like we did with our breath, when I said, bring your awareness to your breath, even though I didn't say Simon Says, we all kind of brought our conscious awareness to our breath and took a deep breath. Now, one of the sort of common examples of this, I guess you could say, is that of when someone says to you, don't think of pink elephants. And of course, now we all go and start thinking of pink elephants, even though we weren't supposed to. And that's one of the tricky things about the RAS, is that when we say things like don't, it doesn't register, don't do that, or don't do this. It just takes the information after that and does it and adds it to the list. And so we're going to include that into our perception. So later on in one of the other sessions, we'll probably get into this a little bit deeper. But when we are exploring our limiting beliefs, for instance, and we tell ourselves, okay, I don't want to have an inner critic anymore. I'm going to be cautious of those thoughts. Our awareness is still going to be brought to when we're being an inner critic. And so it becomes an important distinction to make, that we can't just sort of wish something away. We have to approach it from a different direction in order to help change our perception of it. Hopefully that makes sense. So again, going back to awareness as an indicator in relation to each of the soul selves, when we look at awareness in each of the 5 soul selves, it is going to look, our perception of awareness is going to change slightly in each soul self. So just to give you an overview, in the bodily self, I say that there is no awareness. Essentially, we're operating from a place of where we're unconscious or not self-aware. In the vital self, awareness is now on awareness. So we're having that first glimpse of what awareness looks like and how to interact with it. In the thinking self, our awareness becomes awareness on the mind or on our thoughts. In the observer self, awareness is now on consciousness. And then in the transcendent self, everything is consciousness, essentially. So the awareness goes away and we are just pure consciousness. So those are the 5 sort of states of consciousness, or states of awareness, in relation to each of the 5 soul selves. And before I go on, I just want to see how everybody's doing and see if there's any questions. Everybody seems to be doing good. Okay, I'll carry on. So let's dive into the first soul self, which is the bodily self. Actually, I need a drink. Bear with me. So the bodily self. This is when we are most this is when we're most rooted in our ego. So what is our ego? That, I like to say, is when we are most rooted in our identity. To say that better, our ego is anything that gives us that illusion of separateness. So that anything that makes us feel separate from everything else around us, anything that makes us individual, anything that gives us our identity. This can be our thoughts, our names, the things that we own, our behavior, on and on. The list goes on and on. So basically, there is this moment, when we are born from our mother's womb. We are pure consciousness. We are arriving into this world in this blissful state. And I think that's where the phrase, bliss is our birthright, comes from. Because at that moment, when we're arriving into the world, we are that soul light that I was talking about earlier. And we have no concept or no awareness that we are separate from everything else. We just simply are. We don't have any, we have no ego at that point. There's nothing other than this pure light. And so the first thing that happens after we're born typically is we're given a name. Like I was given my name, Carrie. And of course that name comes with a certain meaning that's attached to it. And then, I have a last name that has some sort of cultural history attached to it. And so as soon as we emerge from our mothers and we have this name, that's sort of the first layer of ego that is placed over this light of our soul. And as we grow and learn, we learn different beliefs from our parents, different habits from our friends. We learn different rules from our teachers, and so on and so forth. This just goes on. And every time we add more and more layers of covering to this light of our soul. And as we go through life, we start to collect more names and more titles to ourselves. Like I have a Bachelor of Science degree, and I've worked here and I've worked there, and these all become added to this this sort of ego exterior that's creating shadow over this light. And this is all part and parcel that's of being human being. It's all normal. And eventually, as we're packing on all these layers of ego and collecting all these titles and different parts of ourselves, as like I'm a mother and I'm a wife and on it goes, we're doing it to achieve some sort of sense of satisfaction or fulfillment in our lives. But what we have to realize is that so often when we're looking externally and adding all of these things externally, they are kind of a fleeting sense of satisfaction. And again, this is what I'm going to talk about in more detail in our third session, this sort of cycle of fulfillment or satisfaction. But for now, as we're adding all of these layers of ego and titles and so on and so forth on top of this light of our soul, eventually it's almost like the light goes out and we end up in this state of suffering. We're more often dissatisfied than we are satisfied. I would say probably 90% or more of the time we're unhappy because we just want the next thing and the next thing and the next thing in order to feel like we have some sort of sense of fulfillment. And this is what it feels like to be in the bodily self. We're complaining and we're unhappy and we're miserable. Maybe we're depressed. There's anxiety. There's all of these things that don't feel particularly great when we're here, and we're unconscious to it. Like I said before, in terms of our awareness, we have no awareness of like the fact that this is something that we could change, or that there is any other sort of way of living. This is just the way that it is. And typically now in this state, we blame other people. So we'll say things like, if they would do something different, then I would feel better, right? Like if they would call me, then I would feel better. Or if they would clean the kitchen, then I would feel better. And so there's a lot of blaming that happens when we're in the bodily self. And what goes kind of hand in hand with that is this idea that we are a victim. And so we have this victim mentality a good portion of the time. And maybe we're a victim of time or a victim of circumstance, or maybe we are actual, victims of some sort of violence, and that's caused us trauma. And these are all factors that contribute to these layers of ego that are shaping the person that we are, and again, kind of covering up that light of our soul. So if we think about identifiers in the bodily self, blame and victim, these were two of those words that popped up for me repeatedly, time and time again on my own spiritual journey, and then again in other people's awakenings journeys, that really stood out for me to signify that I was in my bodily self. So then when we move into the vital self, the next perspective, we have this sort of shift. And sometimes, like, being so rooted in that bodily self, something will just suddenly snap, and we'll realize, nothing's going to change until I change something, right? And all of a sudden we realize we need to take responsibility in order to feel better about our lives. We can't blame anybody anymore. It's up to us to take that next step and do something different. And this is when we're having a vital self moment. I've actually identified 3 categories of vital self moments that I will discuss in greater detail in a later session. But just to give you a quick glimpse, like there's the soul glimpses, which would be like watching a sunset, and you have that real, you're moved by the beauty of the scene, and all of a sudden you're fully in a moment, you're present, and everything is wonderful and amazing, right? And you just feel like you connected with something greater than yourself. Then there's peak experiences, which is sort of a more prolonged experience that can be quite a shock to the system. And once you've had that peak experience, it changes you completely and puts you on a different perspective, or what's the word I'm looking for? Just a different path altogether from where you went before that happened. And then the third category is called disidentification, and that's where your suffering in the bodily self becomes so extreme that your ego essentially completely disidentifies with you, and you move directly into the transcendent self. And there's quite a few spiritual teachers that talk about this in terms of how they had their own spiritual awakening. And this doesn't happen to everybody. Often these moments just happen in small bits and pieces, and we return to the vital self again and again and again, having these soul glimpses or peak experiences, and we're sort of moved through to start asking those questions of like, what was that experience? How can I have it again? And what do I need to do differently? And who am I, right? All these profound questions. One of, you probably all know this song by Leonard Cohen, Anthem, which is, there's a line in it that says, there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. And I like to think of that as sort of a vital self moment where, again, we have that light of our soul that is covered in all of our ego coverings, and all of a sudden that ego cracks open and the light of our soul is able to shine through. So when we have these vital self moments, awareness is now on awareness. So going back to our theme for the night, awareness, this is when we first become aware. And it'll either scare us and we run back to the bodily self essentially and go back to being unconscious and unaware, or we're going to get curious about it and we're going to want to know more. And that's now when we move into the thinking self. So the thinking self. When I first realized that I was capable of changing my thoughts, like when I first really brought my attention to my thoughts, that was a pretty profound moment for me, I have to admit, because I think for the majority of my life, I didn't realize I had any kind of control over the thoughts that I was thinking. Like I can remember meditating and doing like mantra meditation and using the mantra Soham and repeating it and repeating it and repeating it as kind of a way to distract myself from the thoughts that I was having. If I was in a really sort of distraught place, then I could bring my attention to this word over and over and over again in order to distract myself. But what I didn't realize is that I didn't necessarily need a distraction. I actually could not think those thoughts anymore, that I had that ability to be able to stop doing that. And it may seem so simple now, but it was such a profound moment for me to be able to realize that. And so as I started to sort of explore what our thoughts were and what types of thoughts that we have, and learn that our beliefs are just thoughts that we keep thinking, then I could change my beliefs. And then all of a sudden I was challenging the beliefs that I had, because I realized they were just simply thoughts that I had repeated over and over again, or thoughts that somebody else had repeated to me over and over again, and then I adopted them as my own. And so this is sort of fundamentally what starts to happen when you're in the thinking self, is you start to question if the thoughts you're having are serving you. What is the emotional response that you're having to the thoughts that you're thinking? What are the beliefs that you're thinking, and are they still things that hold true to you? Are they true to your core values? And so all of this starts to come to the surface, and a lot of the pieces of our ego that we've layered over our soul light, we start to look at them differently and recognize that they're there, because so often we are so deeply identified with these beliefs and these thoughts that we don't even question whether or not they belong to us. So as we start to call them out and essentially do the work or heal our trauma, or do a deep introspection, starting with personal development, which becomes personal growth, which becomes spiritual growth, which becomes spiritual expansion, and so on and so forth. This all gets kind of shaken up and loosened up in the thinking self. And then within that, there's modalities that we start to use to help us to be able to identify these parts of our ego and to embrace them, essentially, as opposed to get rid of them. But again, we'll talk about that in another session. And sorry, that's my train of thought. I knew this would happen at some point, which is totally fine. And I'm okay with it, because it just means that I've suddenly stepped so presently into the moment that all of my thoughts have gone, ironically. And I used to be terrified of this happening, but actually now I am embracing it, because it's kind of a gift of that real presence that I think we are often seeking, ironically, on the spiritual journey. So I was gonna share with you a couple of tools that I have used in the thinking self that may or may not be useful to you. The first one is in relation to meditation, and the sort of purpose of meditation, in some sense, is to be able to find that space that exists in between our thoughts. But often, meditation can be really intimidating, because I think as we, especially when we're just starting to do it, there are so many thoughts, and it just seems like they just keep coming and keep coming and keep coming, and then some of them, when one of them shows up, it calls all its friends to come with them, right? And it has this kind of momentum that it snowballs, and these thoughts become bigger and bigger. So it can be daunting to know how, or to just step into doing meditation. And one of the tools that I was taught early on was that when a thought comes into our mind when you're meditating, to kind of imagine wrapping it up in a bubble and then just letting it float away. And then the next thought will come, and you wrap that one in a bubble and let it float away. And you just continue to do that, and just notice as those thoughts are coming in, and you can bring your awareness to them and then let them pass. The other tool that I found really helpful was this idea of touchstones. So when we start to notice our thoughts, not just during meditation, but just in our day-to-day activities, and we catch ourselves in a thought that we don't want to be thinking, that might be negative, or maybe we're starting to complain about somebody in our mind, or maybe our inner critic is stepping in. This is when I reach for my touchstone, and a touchstone is a very happy memory, essentially, that I just have stored ready and waiting for these moments when I need to think about them and draw them in, just to kick those other thoughts out of my head. So my touchstone is from when I was working at Club Med in Turks and Caicos. And during my free time, I was learning to windsurf. And so I was out on the board one afternoon, I would say, and the wind was just right. The water was super calm. I mean, the beach and the water at that particular resort was just stunning. The crystal blue turquoise waters and the white sand beaches. And so I had just pulled up the sail on the windsurfer and gotten my hands into position and caught the wind in my sail and was starting to move along. And, I just leaned back into it, and everything just seemed to align just perfectly in those moments. And as I was windsurfing across the ocean, I could look down into the clear water and see starfish on the floor of the ocean. And so that whole image is my touchstone that I reach for anytime that I want to change the thoughts that I'm thinking, when I need to shift my perception and change the momentum of the thought that I'm having. So hopefully those might be useful to you when you are thinking in the thinking self. Okay. Now we're moving into the observer self. Oh, you know what? I didn't actually summarize. So the thinking self, again, going back to our topic for tonight, awareness. In the thinking self, awareness is on the mind, or awareness is on the thoughts. So in the bodily self, we have no awareness. In the vital self, awareness is on awareness. In the thinking self, awareness is now on the mind. Moving into the observer self, awareness is now on consciousness. And the observer self isn't something that we can really think ourselves into. It's more something that we sort of have to relax into, or that sort of finds us. And again, going back to the meditation, it's like that space between our thoughts. There's this ease and this silence that tends to expand. There is, I'm not sure if you remember, in the mall, there used to be these 3D posters. I guess you can look at them online now. There's probably hundreds of them out there. But I remember being a teenager and being at the mall, and there's just, those posters with a bunch of different colors and shapes in them. And somewhere within that sort of mess of colors and whatnot, there was supposed to be an image that you could see if you stared at the poster long enough or looked at it the right way. And so when you're in that observer self, it's kind of similar to like these 3D posters. You can stare at it and look at it and try and find it, but it's not until you just, shift your gaze. Like I found, if I looked at the reflection on the glass in front of the poster and kind of like, I don't know, relaxed my eyes or something like that, there was this technique that I found worked. All of a sudden that 3D image would pop out and you'd be immersed in it. And like the first time it happened, it was so shocking, but like it just, everything felt so different. And once you're in that 3D image, you can, move from side to side and up and down, and that image moves with you. You are really immersed in it. And so, yeah, it's similar when you're in the observer self, because now you are now just sort of like witnessing your thoughts, and you're observing your emotions, and you're observing your behavior and your actions without actually being involved in it. It's kind of like you've stepped back out of yourself, and you're just sort of watching from behind the scenes, but you're watching without any sort of judgment. And you're just accepting of it, and along with that, stepping back is this greater sense of ease and this greater sense of comfort and peace that emerges from this observing place. This is essentially when you are now aware, your awareness is on consciousness. And it becomes a little bit difficult to start to try and describe it with words, because now we're moving into a space where we are trying to use words that are created by the mind to describe something that is now beyond the mind. So there's lots of different terminology that we may encounter from various different spiritual teachers and spiritual texts and whatnot that we are going to find along our path, and a lot of this terminology is essentially trying to describe the same experience, but just using different words. And so you'll start to notice that everybody has a different name for these different phases and different stages and different experiences, but they're all essentially describing the same thing. That's something that's fascinated me this whole journey, and I've got lists and lists of all of the different names and titles and stuff that I've encountered along the way, and then been able to sort of like draw all these correlations as to what it is that people are describing. But anyways, that's an aside. I won't get into that right now. So then our awareness is on consciousness in the observer self. As we now move into the transcendent self, we are consciousness. So everything becomes consciousness. And again, this is where it becomes difficult to describe what's going on, because it's something that needs to be experienced. It's not something that we can use the mind to understand. But one of the real common descriptions or themes that has emerged from the research that I've done on the transcendent self is that there is this typical experience where someone's sense of I, like their ability or their use of the word me or I or them or they, just sort of drops completely out of their experience. And so they are no longer feeling that separation from everything else, right? They're merging their consciousness, their conscious awareness has merged with everything around them, and they're no longer considering themselves an individual. Their understanding of being separate no longer exists, right? And it's such a fascinating concept. And I was listening to this Zoom call the other day, researching the sort of the higher is not necessarily a really appropriate word, but like the more expanded states beyond these 5 soul selves. And they talk about time and space in the same ways, like here and now, it no longer exists. There is no sense of here and now or there and then. And like those words just have absolutely no meaning and no significance in that space. So one of the things that's important to know about the soul selves and moving from the bodily self to the transcendent self is that we can do this many times a day. We can jump from the bodily self to the thinking self, and then from the observer self to the vital self, and just there's no rhyme or reason to how it happens, or what order they go into, or anything like that. We simply are just experiencing what we're experiencing at any given time. And what we'll notice is that some of us may kind of stay rooted in one of the soul selves for a long period of time. Like, I often find myself in the thinking self a lot of the time, which makes sense because I'm constantly like organizing and clarifying and classifying and trying to do the work and figure these things out. When I probably would feel better if I could just be in the observer self, just sort of watching everything happen, as opposed to like in there trying to figure it all out. But and then of course, when you're in the transcendent self, again, you're over your sorry, there's a word that just came and went from my vocabulary. Your fundamental well-being, that's the word I'm looking for. Your fundamental well-being like shifts into this place of bliss for the most part, right? Like, the transcendent self feels really good to be in. A lot of the time people describe that space as like pure love or unconditional love. Some other schools of thought call that knowledge. But it is just a really profound sense of satisfaction that you can be in when you find yourself in that transcendent self space. And then again, we can also be at different phases or stages in on our spiritual path, or on our spiritual journey, with different aspects of our lives. So like, I often say, like, with self-love, I have experienced transcendent self-love, but then when it comes to money, I feel like I'm really stuck in that bodily self a lot of the time. And then my relationship with food can be in another place, and other relationships in my life can be in another place again, and so on and so forth. So as we start to understand the fundamentals of what it looks like to be in each one of these soul selves, we can then start to look more deeply and specifically at the various aspects of our lives and determine where we might be in that particular aspect, and then kind of project to know what it might be like to move out of where we are into a more transcendent space when it comes to eating, or with all of our relationships, and so on and so forth. And one of the sort of overarching themes that's emerged from the research that I've done is that as all of these aspects of our lives move towards a transcendent experience, they all really lead us back to being in a more transcendent space of self-love. So a lot of, I honestly believe that all of the work that we do and the journey that we're on is just returning back to a place of really profound self-love. I wasn't going to talk about that tonight, but it came out. So I'll have to expand on that in another session. The next session, I hope you'll come back for the next session, is going to be, again, the first Monday of October, which is October 2nd. And we'll be looking at the nervous system in relation to this Soul Selves framework. So what does our nervous system do in each one of these soul selves? Before I leave you tonight, if there's not any questions or any comments or anything anyone wants to say, I just want to invite you now for the next month to bring your awareness to those moments when we're in the bodily self and we feel like we're blaming other people, or when we're feeling like a victim. And when you bring your awareness to those moments, I don't need you to do anything. I just want you to acknowledge them and just take note of them. And like I said, just notice when you're blaming other people, and notice when you are feeling like a victim. And I think even just by doing that, by shifting your awareness to those two things, those two bodily self behaviors, I think you'll notice a shift again in your fundamental well-being. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts if you come back in October, or even send me a message privately to know if that changes your experience at all. So thank you very much for spending this hour with me tonight. I appreciate your time immensely, and I'm so grateful to be able to share these ideas with you and go on this journey with you. And if you have any questions, if anything comes up that you feel like you're interested in knowing more about, or that you are finding you're struggling with, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to have these conversations anytime. And I hope that maybe some of this you'll be able to sort of incorporate into your own practice, or it may just sort of permeate your thoughts for a little while, or you may forget all about it as soon as this ends. And that's totally normal too, because even I forget about it on a day-to-day basis, because that's what we're programmed to do as human beings. We forget that consciousness exists, and that we have been given these tools to empower us in order to experience that bliss that is our birthright more and more of the time. But if we just keep reminding ourselves and coming back and having these conversations, then I think it becomes easier and easier to move into that transcendent self space, if that's something that you want to do. So again, thank you. And I'll say good night. I'm not sure why I did that. Good night. Thanks, everyone.